It was raining last night and we were in Central Otago and the Mackenzie were going, great, keep going, because we want the lakes to fill and we want to make sure that the spot electricity prices are actually going to be there and that businesses don't close and that the worst wholesale and retail electricity prices seen for, ever, will not be bespoiling us at a time when we're trying to deal with a cost of living crisis and people losing their jobs, I have to say. But ta-da, it's gone away again, which is a good time to say, well, God, if it's like this and it's August and the rains haven't fallen, what's it going to be like in the future? We're joined by Ian Llewellyn, who is the energy reporter for BusinessDesk's and an absolute expert in this area, and he joins us again. Ian, thanks so much for talking to us again about this issue. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Listen, I take it that all of our problems are weather-related, are they? We've talked on this show before about the fact that we don't have gas available to us and that we haven't done any oil and gas exploration, etc., but are our problems at the moment solely related to weather?
No. We are having a drier than usual year, but it's not even a dry year yet. It's a combination of the weather and the lack of gas supply. Those two issues combined because gas is just setting the price for power at the moment.
Okay, so in the meantime, the suggestion is, Ian, we're heading into some sort of energy crisis that's getting worse, not better. Those alarmist views that are currently being expressed in the media over the last week or so, are they realistic in your view?
Well, it's obvious signs that things are not working. When businesses are mothballing or saying they can't afford to operate, so something's clearly not working well. But it's a fuel problem, basically. So we don't have enough water, so we've been running the hydro stations really, really hard, and it's been hard for people to supply gas, so you've got to solve those two issues. When it becomes a crisis, I know that the sector's working bloody hard because they're facing the threat of interventions. They don't like being unpopular, so they're working really hard to secure more gas supplies. Whether they can do that in time, and like you say, the other factor is a couple of weeks of heavy rain, and most of this will go away, except the gas problem, of course.
So, in your view, the threat that was exposed last week by Shane Jones, amongst others, that the government may intervene. We talked to David Seymour about this last week as well. There's a cabinet meeting. I imagine electricity prices are high on that agenda today as we talk. Is there any realistic scope for government intervention in the energy market?
There are different ways they could intervene. This is not a new situation globally. In past events in both the UK and Australia had gas supply issues a couple of years ago. And what they did there was they put a cap on the wholesale prices. That worked for a couple of weeks. But then what happened was that the people supplying the gas couldn't make enough money to keep doing their work and they went broke. So it caused a different problem down the lane. That's the main intervention that they could do on this. There are other more radical interventions that people talk about, like splitting up the gentailers, that's the generator retailers, into two separate arms, because a lot of people think that's the problem. Whether that would cure this particular problem, I got some doubts about that, whether that could work at all. Basically, we just got to get more fuel. That's the answer.
Short term, when we've got to get more fuel, if the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and the rain's not falling, then I'm assuming we have to import that fuel, or do we have accessibility to fuel stocks in this country that we don't like to use because they are unfashionable?
Well, the main place that they'll probably aim at, and this is me speculating about what has been happening, is that Nexus is the single largest user of gas in this country. They make methanol, and I think they use basically about 40% of our gas supply. What they've done in the past, very quietly, which no one even notices because it's just been done, is that they give up some of their gas each year to the electricity generators to then generate electricity. what I imagine will happen is that the retailers, generators will push harder for Methanex to give them more gas. So poor old Methanex will have to cut the production. They're already down more than half their production capacity at the moment, so I imagine they'll be the losers in that. They won't be too bad because people will pay them for the gas, I guess, but that's the obvious solution in the short term.
Okay, so we talked about Methanex last week. They're a Canadian-owned company. I think they've got sites in 9, or it might be 9 sites in 6 countries, or 6, anyhow, something like that.
Yeah, that's correct.
As you say, they have a long-term gas contract here that takes the greatest proportion of New Zealand's gas that would otherwise be available to help us through these times. They would have entered that long-term contract, years ago, I would expect, when gas was plentiful and we didn't have a problem. One assumes that if we're going to get them to give something up, we're going to have to compensate them quite considerably for that.
Oh, well, they have been giving up gas, and I don't know the terms of the compensation, but certainly they'll be being paid a price for not using the gas, or quite rightly, because they can't run their business. So there'll be someone who will be paying for that, and they'll get passed on our costs. But like I say, it's the only obvious issue I can see. The other thing, I don't know if you noticed, late Friday, Transpower moved to change the rules about how the lakes operate, allowing some of the big lakes to drop to a lower level. That'll free up quite a bit of power in the short term, and reduce the risk of brownouts or blackouts or whatever might be needed in the future. So that will go some way to help as well.
So we're talking the Tikapos, the Pukekis, the Waitekis, Benmores, Avonmores, are we?
It's from my memory, there's 3. It's Pukaki, Hawea, and there's one other whose name slips me now. So they have a consent level which they have to stop operating when they can't draw down below that level. And basically, Transpower can declare an emergency and say, right, you can go deeper and reduce the lake levels lower. And what they're doing, this shows why it's a double-edged problem. They're changing the rules to call a crisis. I don't want to make it sound like a crisis, but that's what it's called, a critical situation. They changed the rules to trigger that at a much lower level than we've had in the past. In technical terms, we're not going through a dry year yet. It's just that the gas problem has accentuated the storage levels in the lakes.
Right, which now leads to the next other question, which is that Huntly's still burning coal, yeah?
Coal and gas.
And for how long can that carry on? Are there any rules or regulations, any legislation that prevents that occurring into the future?
No. Purely supply fuel. As long as they've got coal and as long as they get gas, they can keep running. One of the other problems around this at the moment is, which I'm just looking at the moment, writing a story about, is we're now very reliant on those gas and coal units to keep running. And some of them are getting quite old. So there's a risk that they might break down. People don't realise how much electricity sector units are going in and out of action all the time. You don't notice because someone else comes in to fill this gap. At the moment, we're a bit stretched. So for a major unit like one of the Huntly Rankin units fell over, for instance, we'd have a problem. If Contact's TCC plant, which runs on gas, fell over, we'd have a problem. I've just been talking to some of the people running those units, and they're saying they're running pretty well. They're quite confident, but there's no guarantees in life. We've just stretched the situation that we're exposed to risk now much more than in the past.